Chapter 1. The Arena of Blood. The arena is quiet. The only sound is the rasp of leather sandals on sand. A man stands in the shadow of the gate, eyes fixed on the bright light ahead. He knows what's waiting for him: screaming crowds, steel blades, and death. He doesn't know who he'll face. That's not his choice. The only thing he knows is this: if he loses, he dies. And if he wins, he might get to live, just long enough to fight again. This is not a movie. This is not a game. This is the Roman Empire. And this is the life of a gladiator. In this documentary, we'll walk through a day in the life of a real gladiator. Not the fantasy, not the myths, the truth, how they trained, what they ate, what they feared, and how Rome turned blood into entertainment. We'll uncover the secrets behind the swords, the stadiums, and the men who lived and died for the crowd. Chapter 2. Who were the gladiators? Gladiators were not all the same. Some were slaves, captured in war or punished for crimes. Others were volunteers, free men who signed contracts to fight for fame, fortune, or survival. These men were known as octorati. They came from every corner of the Roman world: Gauls, Thracians, Africans, Greeks. Each brought different weapons, fighting styles, and reputations, and each was classified into a distinct category, or armatura, like the heavily armoured secutor, or the nimble, lightly armed retiarius, who fought with a net and trident. Once chosen or sold into the life, a gladiator was sent to a training school, called a ludus. The most famous one sat right next to the Colosseum, the Ludus Magnus. Here they were not treated like ordinary slaves. They were investments. Gladiators received medical care, specialized diets, and intensive physical training. But their lives were still controlled. They were locked in barracks. Their every move watched. Some were even treated like celebrities. Graffiti in Pompeii shows gladiator fanboys and fangirls cheering for their favorite fighters. Their images appeared on pottery, in art, even on public walls. And if a gladiator fought well enough, for long enough, he could be awarded a wooden sword, the rudis, a symbol of freedom. But few lived to see that day. Chapter 3. Inside the Ludus. Life inside the ludus was strict, controlled, and painfully intense. Gladiators trained every day under the supervision of a lanista, a brutal trainer who was often a former gladiator himself. Discipline was everything. Defiance meant punishment, sometimes death. Training focused on endurance, precision, and survival. Fighters drilled with wooden swords called rudis, striking at sandbags and dummies for hours. The goal was not just skill, it was muscle memory. Reflex, the kind that saves your life when the blade is real. Their diet was surprisingly modern. Gladiators were often called barley men. They ate high-carb meals with beans and grains to bulk up. Their bodies were padded with fat, not just for strength, but to protect vital organs during combat. A deep cut to the belly meant death. Fat was armor. Despite being slaves, they had access to some of the best doctors in the empire. Archaeological finds in gladiator graveyards show signs of expert bone healing. These men were patched up after each fight, kept alive like racehorses, but they were also expendable. If they didn't show promise, they were beaten, starved, or sold. Every man knew that stepping into the arena wasn't just performance. It was a gamble with fate. There was no mercy, only preparation. Chapter 4. Weapons, styles, and specialties. Not all gladiators fought the same. In fact, the variety of combat styles was one of the reasons Roman games remained popular for centuries. Each match was designed for contrast. Power versus speed. Armor versus agility, the perfect formula for blood sport. One of the most iconic matchups was between the secutor and the retiarius. The secutor wore heavy armour, carried a large rectangular shield, and wielded a short sword, the gladius. His helmet was smooth, almost featureless, with only 2 small eye holes. That design wasn't just aesthetic, it protected him from the trident of his opponent. The retiarius fought almost naked, save for a padded armguard and shoulder protector. He was armed with a net, a trident, and a dagger. Light and fast, his job was to entangle, frustrate, and strike from range. It was Rome's version of a bullfight, brute force versus strategy. Then came the Mumio, with a broad helmet featuring a fish-shaped crest. He fought like a Roman soldier and often faced the Thraex, or Thracian gladiator, who wielded a curved sword and carried a small rectangular shield. Their battles were drawn from the memory of Rome's military victories. Each matchup was a reenactment of conquest. Other classes included the Hoplomachus, inspired by Greek hoplites, with a spear and round shield, the Dimachurus, a dual sword fighter, and the rare provocator, who wore chest armour and usually fought only others of his class, perhaps a hint of gladiator duels being treated like duels of honour. Each style had its own rhythm, its own risks, and its own fans. Some Roman citizens developed intense loyalty to certain classes, cheering not for individuals, but for the role they played in the dance of death. Weapons were real, razor-sharp, but occasionally dulled by order of the editor, the man who staged the games. His goal wasn't always death, it was to excite the crowd. Sometimes a good fight was more valuable than a quick kill. To the Romans, this wasn't just combat, it was theatre. Chapter 5. Game Day. A fight to the death? The morning of a match was quiet, focused. Gladiators would eat a light meal. They were oiled, checked by medics, and armed with the weapons assigned to their class. Armour was polished, blades were inspected, and nerves were sharpened like steel. Then came the pompa, the grand procession. Trumpets blared. Gladiators marched into the arena behind banners, musicians, and even priests. This was not just a fight, it was a sacred ritual, a gift to the gods and a gift to the people. The crowd in the Colosseum could reach 50,000. Senators, citizens, slaves, all packed into the tiers, roaring with anticipation. The gladiators saluted the emperor or the sponsor of the games. They might even say the famous phrase, "Hail, Emperor." Those who are about to die salute you. But here's the truth. Most gladiators didn't die. Not every match ended in death. These men were investments. Some had fought a dozen times or more. A well-trained gladiator was expensive to replace. A match might end when one man was disarmed, wounded, or thrown to the ground. If he was still alive, the decision to spare him fell to the editor, the sponsor of the event. He would listen to the crowd. Were they satisfied? Was the fight good enough? Did the defeated man show virtues? Courage? This is where the myth of the thumbs down comes in. Contrary to what movies tell us, the Romans never used a clear thumb-down gesture to signal death. Historians believe it was more likely a turned thumb, either up, down, or even a closed fist. The exact gesture is still debated. If mercy was granted, the loser lived to fight another day. If not, he was expected to accept death with dignity. Some gladiators knelt and held out their necks to the sword. The final strike was quick. Or, at least, it was supposed to be. Not all munera, or games, were equal. Some were carefully staged and supervised. Others were bloody free-for-alls. The rules depended on the era, the emperor, and the mood of the mob. But no matter the outcome, once a gladiator entered the arena, the gods and the crowd held his fate. Chapter 6. Blood and Spectacle, Gladiators and Roman Society. To understand gladiators, you have to understand the crowd. Because gladiators didn't just fight for survival, they fought for attention, for approval, and sometimes for love. The games were never just about blood. They were a tool of control, a way for emperors and elites to keep the population entertained and distracted. Bread and circuses, as the Roman poet Juvenal put it. Feed the people and give them games, and they won't ask questions. The Colosseum wasn't just an arena, it was a symbol of power, of wealth, of the empire's ability to control life and death. When a gladiator killed in the arena, it wasn't just combat, it was theatre. A living story, performed for tens of thousands. Politicians used the games to win public favour. Rich families paid for lavish matches during festivals or political campaigns. Emperors used them to show generosity or cruelty. Nero and Commodus even fought in the arena themselves, though always in staged, safe bouts. The audience came from every layer of society. The rich sat close to the action. The poor filled the upper levels. Even women attended, though their seating was restricted. And while some viewers cheered for blood, others came for the drama, the strategy, the personalities. Gladiators became celebrities. Their names were scratched onto walls. Some had groupies. There are even love poems about gladiators, describing their scars like badges of honour. The Roman crowd respected courage above all. A good death could win more admiration than a lucky victory. A gladiator who fell bravely might be remembered. A coward who begged, forgotten. The games weren't just a pastime. They were a reflection of Rome itself, disciplined, brutal, theatrical, and obsessed with honour. Chapter 7. The Colosseum, Rome's engine of death. At the heart of Rome stood the Colosseum, a monument to the empire's ambition, engineering, and appetite for blood. Completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, it could hold more spectators than most modern sports stadiums, over 50,000 people. From the outside, it was majestic. Marble columns, arched gates, 4 towering stories. But beneath the surface was something far more complex, a machine built for violence. Below the arena floor lay the hypodrome, a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and lifts. Gladiators, animals, even stage props were moved in secret and raised to the floor through trapdoors. To the audience, it seemed like magic. One moment, an empty field. The next, a lion leaping into view. The arena floor itself was made of wood, covered in sand to soak up the blood. That's where we get the word arena, from the Latin harina, meaning sand. Engineers installed pulley systems, elevators, even false scenery. Some games included forests, deserts, or shipwrecks. For special events, the arena was even flooded to stage mock naval battles, though historians now believe this was more common in earlier venues, not the Colosseum itself. The crowd was managed with military precision. Each Roman citizen had a ticket that listed their seat. Awning systems, called velarium, were extended to shade the audience. Vendors sold food, musicians performed. It was as much a festival as it was a bloodbath. But above all, the Colosseum was a message. That Rome could command nature. That Rome could build beauty and unleash terror in the same breath. Every stone, every scream, every drop of blood was part of the performance. Chapter 8. Women in the Arena, the Gladiatrices. Most people don't know this, but not all gladiators were men. For a brief time in Roman history, women also fought in the arena. They were called gladiatrices. The evidence is rare, but it exists, etched into stone reliefs, mentioned in satirical poems, and even recorded in official imperial documents. These women were not stunt performers. They trained, bled, and fought just like the men. Some were slaves, others were freeborn, choosing the arena as a path to fame or infamy. Roman society saw them as scandalous, even vulgar. But the crowd loved them. A famous inscription from Halicarnassus shows two women gladiators named Amazon and Achillea locked in battle. The records say they fought so well that both were granted freedom. That was rare, even for men. Women fought with the same weapons, in the same arenas, often topless or minimally armoured. This wasn't just spectacle, it was shock value. The Roman elite used it to stir controversy and ticket sales. Emperor Domitian is said to have staged women fights at night by torchlight. Others arranged matches between women and dwarves or exotic animals. These weren't standard matches. They were designed to provoke, but not everyone approved. By the early 2nd century, the Roman Senate banned women from participating in the games entirely. Emperor Septimius Severus outlawed the practice around 200 CE, citing moral decline. Even then, the legacy of the gladiatrix survived, a symbol of rebellion, of gender, violence, and power twisted together under the hot Roman sun. They may have fought for a short time, but they shattered the rules of the empire in the process. Chapter 9: Freedom, Fame, or the Grave. A gladiator's life was violent, but it wasn't always short. Some men fought 10, 20, even 30 times. With each victory came rewards: food, wine, special privileges, and sometimes even money. In rare cases, freedom. The highest honour a gladiator could receive was the rudis, a simple wooden sword. But this sword was not for killing. It was a symbol of release. A man granted the rudis became a rudiarius, freed from the obligation to fight. He could walk away, no longer a slave, but not all of them did. Some rudiari chose to return to the arena. As free men, they could fight for pay. These veterans were often the most famous and respected of all, like modern prize fighters. They became stars of the blood sport. Fame, for those who survived, was real. Graffiti from Pompeii and other cities shows how gladiators were adored. Fans scratched names and match records into walls. Some fighters had nicknames, personal symbols, and groupies. One inscription describes a gladiator as Suspirium Puellarum, the heartthrob of the girls. Gladiators were also hired to appear at banquets, festivals, and public events. Some even sold merchandise, including oil scraped from their skin after a fight, believed by Roman women to have aphrodisiac powers. Their bodies were scarred, but their image was glamorous, at least to the crowd. But this glory came with a heavy price. Most gladiators did not die in their first fight, but death was always waiting. Studies of gladiator graves, like those found in Ephesus and York, show clear signs of trauma. Skull fractures, deep blade wounds, and healed injuries from past battles. The average age of death was just 25, and yet they rarely died alone. Gladiators lived in close quarters, trained as a unit, and often formed powerful bonds. Some burial sites suggest gladiators were laid to rest beside their closest comrades. In one case from Ephesus, 2 male fighters were buried hand in hand, fueling speculation about deep companionship, or perhaps love. They were more than warriors, they were brothers. And in a world ruled by power and fear, their loyalty to each other stood out as something almost human. Many died with dignity, with honour. Their gravestones sometimes told their story. How many victories, how many wounds, how many years they lasted. These brief inscriptions are all that's left of lives spent under the shadow of death. Victory brought glory, but only a few ever lived long enough to see the outside of the ludus. For most, the grave was their only freedom. Chapter 10: What Hollywood Got Wrong. For most people, everything they know about gladiators comes from movies and television. Stories filled with dramatic battles, evil emperors, and gladiators fighting to the death in the Colosseum. But much of what we see on screen is more fiction than fact. Take the most famous myth, the thumbs down gesture to signal death. In popular culture, it's simple. Thumbs down means kill. But ancient Roman texts aren't clear. The phrase pollis verso, or with a turned thumb, doesn't explain the direction. In fact, some scholars believe a turned thumb meant mercy, and a closed fist or hidden thumb may have meant death. The actual gestures used in the arena are still debated by historians. Another major misconception is about how often gladiators died. In movies, every match is a fatal one. But in reality, most fights did not end in death. Gladiators were expensive to train and maintain. A skilled fighter might live through dozens of matches. Death did happen, but not nearly as often as Hollywood suggests. Armor and weapons are also misrepresented. Real gladiators didn't wear gleaming, full-body armor. Their gear was designed to expose as much skin as possible. It made fights more dangerous and more thrilling to watch. Helmets were stylized and symbolic, but visibility and mobility were limited. The goal was entertainment, not practicality. And then there's Spartacus. Yes, he was a real person. A gladiator who escaped, led a massive slave rebellion, and terrified Rome for 2 years. But he didn't fight in the Colosseum. It didn't exist during his lifetime. Spartacus died in 71 BCE. The Colosseum wasn't begun until 72 CE under Emperor Vespasian. Still, modern shows like Spartacus from Stars depict arena settings that closely resemble the Colosseum, leading many viewers to mistakenly believe he fought there. Films also miss the structure and order of real gladiator games. Fights had rules. Referees, called summarudis, enforced them. Cheating or dishonorable behavior could result in disqualification or punishment. The arena wasn't a lawless bloodbath. It was controlled chaos. Gladiators weren't mindless killers. They were slaves, soldiers, criminals, and even volunteers. Some hated the life. Others embraced it. But all of them lived under a system that turned suffering into spectacle. Hollywood gives us drama. But the real story? The real story is more complex and far more human. Chapter 11: Legacy of the Gladiators. The last officially recorded gladiator games in the Roman Empire were held in 404 CE. The emperor at the time was Honorius, a Christian ruler who had been pressured for years by bishops and moral reformers to end the bloodshed. According to tradition, recorded by Theodoret and other Christian chroniclers, a monk named Telemachus leapt into an arena to stop a fight and was stoned to death by the crowd. His martyrdom reportedly moved Honorius to ban the games permanently. Whether that story is entirely true remains debated, but it marks a symbolic turning point. Gladiators vanished, but their legacy never did. Throughout late antiquity and the medieval period, gladiator games became a moral warning, held up by Christian writers as evidence of pagan cruelty and decadence. But by the Renaissance, interest in classical culture returned. Roman amphitheatres were studied. Latin inscriptions about gladiators were translated. In time, the image of the gladiator shifted from criminal to cultural icon. Today, the term gladiator evokes strength, defiance, and survival against impossible odds. But the real legacy is more complex and often misunderstood. Modern audiences picture the Colosseum, the sand, the roar of 50,000 voices. But that was just the final act. Gladiators trained in isolation, often in brutal conditions. They lived in locked barracks, separated from the outside world. Their schools, like the Ludus Magnus, Ludus Gallicus, and Ludus Dacicus, were militarized, hierarchical, and intensely specialized. The weapons they used weren't random. Each armatura had tactical reasoning. The Retiarius, for example, used speed and reach with his net and trident. No helmet, no shield. He relied on movement and distance. The Secutor, built like a Roman legionary, was armoured to withstand frontal attacks, but had limited visibility and mobility. These weren't just shows. They were simulated military duels designed to explore Rome's own martial past. Even the scheduling of games had structure. Morning shows often featured venationes, animal hunts. Midday executions followed, often of criminals or condemned men. Only in the afternoon came the actual munera, the gladiator matches. Fights were paired strategically, often pitting styles that had political or ethnic symbolism, like Thracian versus Roman. Inscriptions and grave markers give us more than drama. They give us numbers. One epitaph from Rome tells of a man named Flamma, a Syrian-born gladiator who fought 34 times, won 21, and was offered the rudes, freedom, 4 times. He refused it each time and died in the arena at age 30. Another, Urbicus, fought 13 times and died at 25. These weren't rare exceptions. They were the norm. For every superstar, there were hundreds who died unrecorded. Yet, even among the forgotten, we find hints of humanity. Bones from gladiator cemeteries show medical care, bone setting, and healed injuries. They lived in pain, but they lived longer than people think, because they mattered financially. An injured gladiator was patched up like an injured warhorse. And that brings us to the paradox. The same empire that built aqueducts, libraries, and paved roads also turned human suffering into public entertainment. Gladiators were used as instruments, tools of control, propaganda, and cultural memory. Yet they weren't passive. They trained, they adapted, they formed bonds, and some became legends. The gladiator's true legacy isn't just in movies or stadium names. It's in the enduring fascination with spectacle, in the way modern combat sports echo ancient rituals, in how we still cheer for the lone fighter who refuses to fall. Their story is not just Rome's. It's a reflection of what people value, what we fear, and what we're willing to forgive in the name of entertainment. Gladiators were both victims and icons, weapons and men, and in the end, they left behind more than just blood in the sand. They left behind a mirror, and we're still looking into it. The story you've heard today is built from real history, drawn from archaeological research, Latin inscriptions, Roman legal texts, and the work of modern historians and classicists. From the ruins of the Colosseum to the grave markers of forgotten fighters, every detail is based on what we know or can reasonably reconstruct about life and death in the Roman arena. Of course, the ancient world still holds its mysteries. Some facts are debated, some are lost forever. But we've done our best to bring you a story that is not only dramatic, but truthful. If you enjoyed this documentary, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you think. And if you want to see more deep dives into the strange, brutal, and fascinating corners of history, this is just the beginning. Thank you for watching. And remember, history isn't dead. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.